Welcome to the Think Factory podcast. We got one question for you. What keeps you up at night?
Hello and welcome to the Think Factory podcast, where we explore how ideas turn into action and how people turn values into impact. I'm your host, Susan Kleiner, and I'm excited to welcome Will Francis to the Think Factory podcast today. Will is the Executive Director for the National Association of Social Workers in Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma, and he's a nationally respected advocate for social workers, ethical practice, and public policy that protects both professionals and the communities they serve. With a background in child welfare, education, and government relations, and more than a decade of frontline advocacy, Will has helped shape legislation, strengthen professional standards, and elevate the voice of social workers during some of the most consequential policy debates of our time. Today, we'll talk about leadership, advocacy, the future of social work, and what it really takes to move systems. Welcome, Will, to the Think Factory.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So just first off, talking a little bit about your background, I know you worked both in advocacy and now executive leadership. I'm just curious, what that's been like and what experience have shaped you most for how you're, a leader today.
Yeah, when I first started out in social work, I thought I would be much more engaged with clients. I thought I'd be right there on the ground, sort of working with them. And the more that I saw the challenges they faced, the more I realized that they were a lot bigger than what was going on in the client's life. That many of these folks didn't have access to transportation, didn't have health care, they needed behavioral health services, relationships in their communities were fraught, all of these larger things. And that really drew me to seeing it from sort of a higher up perspective, which got me into advocacy and really loved it and enjoyed it. And the more I was in advocacy, the more I realized there's a lot of energy. You need to be sort of pushing for change and coordinating folks. And it works on a grassroots level and on a direct level with those who are making the decisions. And I saw that maybe I could support the growth and the development of other folks in that space. And so that allowed me to sort of shift over to the administrative standpoint. And, I like to frame it very simply as during my advocacy days, I was telling other people how great social workers are. And then I became an executive director of an association for social workers. So I got to tell the social workers how great they are and support them.
Well, that's kind of a nice shift. And it's interesting, I guess, also to think about things from a bigger policy level, versus the day-to-day, which is obviously also incredibly important and something that you're talking about with the social workers that you advise and lead and tell them how great they are, that you really need both parts of it. I'm curious, what surprised you most when you moved from your advocacy, government relations into the executive director role?
Just how really important collaboration is. I mean, I knew it when I was in the advocacy space. You can't really get anything done in the spaces we're in. If you want to focus on healthcare and immigration and human rights and really get into a lot of the behavioral health issues, you have to do it with partners. You have to figure out, where the clients are, where the other communities are, where other professionals are. You need to work in rural, urban, different funding, like all of these. And when I got into the administrative space, I found it was very, very similar. I needed to be really collaborative in what I do. If we're putting on a conference, we need to find folks who can come sponsor, folks who are willing to share their knowledge and experience and how that works. When I'm engaged out there in the community and figuring out what barriers social workers are facing or what areas they want to work on, I've got to go find partners to move that as well. So it's really this sort of aha has been, there is no doing this alone. A phrase that I use a lot is you can go faster alone and further together. And I've really found that to actually take some of these ideas and policy changes and support for various professionals really to spaces where you're going to see that actual change, you have to have allies and you have to have people. And it's across the aisle. I mean, it is folks who come from conservative backgrounds and maybe look at things at a certain perspective, and then folks who think of things in a more progressive way. You have to have them all at the table, building those resources together, finding those funding streams together, and really ensuring that you're out there ultimately supporting everyone. And that's been an interesting sort of aha in this larger space.
I love that where you said faster alone and further together. That's really
I'm finding that to be very, very real. It's just the only way to go.
100%. And so I guess you found, obviously when you were in advocacy, you knew that you had to collaborate, but I'm interested, your collaborations, I guess your perspective, or maybe people wanting to collaborate with you is a little bit different than it was before.
It is. I'm in a space where I have access to a lot of people, both our membership in Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma, and the larger social work world. And you have a lot of folks who come in and say, we think social workers should be doing this, or social workers should be doing this. Folks really want to be there. So I have to be a little bit discerning about some of those partnerships. And then in others, I have to go find people who are willing to sort of, especially around funding and grant writing and other things, find ways to support us. We're developing a Spanish language social work symposium right now, and we are planning on launching that next year over in El Paso. And that is just such an interesting collaborative space. We have to have leadership in El Paso on board. We have to have the universities in that town aware of what we're doing. Our goal is to bring people from across America, and that's from south to north, into a place where they can share from a cultural and linguistic place all about Spanish social work. And to do that, you just can't do it alone. You just can't think either you're the expert on this issue or partners' voices don't need to be at the table from the planning and the get-go on. And I love that. I mean, I really do. My idea of social work is collaborative, and that's really a huge part. And I really love that, but it's also a lot of work to go build those relationships, bring people to the table, and make sure you're going at a pace that allows everyone to contribute.
That's amazing. I mean, the fact that you're reaching out nationally, I think really speaks to your leadership. And I would hope, that the greater organization is also taking a look at, well, what other communities, aside from Spanish speaking communities and social workers, what other communities would really benefit from having a conference and pulling people together? Because I know that there are a lot of differences in, how different communities respond to mental health, social work, etc. So that's really fabulous. I hope that this is just a start, for other things that could happen.
Thank you.
I'm curious how you stay grounded, right? How do you stay grounded and practice realities while you're working at the systems level? What keeps you grounded?
Yeah, for me, a lot of it is staying connected to folks who are really passionate about their work they're doing, but they understand that there are barriers out there and challenges out there. So it's really keeping a sense of reality around me. That comes from everything of, seeing funding getting cut and being worried about that, and then saying, okay, then who are our partners? Where can we go find other resources? What does that mean? It's, understanding that through some recent federal changes, we're going to see major impacts to healthcare across the United States. And in some of the states I work in that have expanded Medicaid, it is going to pull the floor out from a lot of folks on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. And to stay grounded in that, you have to turn and say, okay, where's the coalition that's focused on this? What can we do to advocate for people to understand what, say, some of the new work requirements are, what some of the new eligibility standards are? It's how do we bring education into? I think the idea is to continue to find ways to engage. And that really is a wonderful way to stay grounded. And then it's having people around you, again, who they understand this is hard work and the lifting will be a big part of what you do, but they're ready to do that. And then lastly, I have to pull back and have my own sense of self-care. I think that self-care is vital to this work. The candle that burns twice as long candle burns twice as bright, burns half as long. So if you're out there really, really using and pushing all that energy out there, it's going to evaporate everything you've got. So you have to be able to come back and say, how do I unplug at times? Understand this crisis isn't going anywhere. How do I have my community, my family, my friends to be with? And how do I make sure that my battery is getting recharged? So when I come back, I'm ready to get into that work again.
Well, we obviously could spend, an entire time talking about just that issue, right? How to recharge our battery. And I loved how you just said, getting the chance and the opportunity to recharge and know that everything else is still there, and that I think it's okay to recharge, and okay, also to find joy in things with how difficult things are, which actually leads me to my next question. You were talking about barriers and challenges, and I know that there's some really specific barriers and challenges facing social workers and social work today. So I'd just love if you could speak a little bit about that. And specifically the issue about the reclassification of social workers.
Yeah, so social work is a really fascinating space. It is the best and the worst thing about social workers are the same thing, which is we can be in any system, we can do anything, and therefore nobody knows what we do. If you ask the stranger on the street, what's a social worker, you're going to get a CPS worker. They're going to say, well, they're in child welfare. And the reality is they're in hospitals, in their schools, they're writing grants, they're working with the elderly, they're doing home visits, they're out in clinics. I mean, they're everywhere. They're the Navy SEALs of the helping profession. You give them a set of tools, you drop them in any space, and they'll thrive. And because of that, it's challenging to then say you should pay social workers more, because what I'm saying is you should pay 100 different people doing 100 different jobs more versus teachers, nurses, doctors. Very easy to sort of figure that out. And in line with that, to get a social work degree, it costs money. And in this country, those costs on university loans have increased. And right now, we're facing a very challenging time where the federal government wants to reclassify how social workers are able to access certain loans. And it would drastically reduce the amount of money we can get if we're not labeled a professional, which is what the government wants to do right now. So we're really fighting along with others. This is not an attack on social work. I want to be very clear. Nurses are there, architects are there, many professional physical therapists, many other professions are there. And we're all coming and saying, look, these are professionals. These should be categorized as a profession. It should allow them to access certain loan repayment opportunities. And you need those steps up so that people can go to college, they can go to university, they can go get a bachelor's or a graduate degree, and then go be part of the community and helping serve and be where they're at. And so, nobody gets into social work for the money and the glory, but it would be nice if you had the resources to take care of yourself, take care of your family, and have that nice financial foundation to go out and do the work you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would have such a visceral reaction, right, to somebody saying, you're not a professional. So I think it's good that you're not the only ones that are there. Although I do think that social workers, I think that the public's perception really is, the CPS worker, which is vital.
Yes.
But for whatever reason, I think that, there's a lesser, again, this could be another podcast, but, we put less of a monetary value on those folks. Totally. And educators and whatnot. That's a whole other conversation, but certainly.
Well, I will say what I love in that other conversation is, what is our value for the helping professions? And social work is just one of those. But when it comes to early childhood caregivers, when it comes to daycares, teachers, all of those, traditionally spaces that are dominated by women and those from female backgrounds, those just are never seen as really worthy of the same sense of investment or designation. So I know it's another podcast, but scratching the surface there does show there's a lot of similarities between a lot of those.
Well, and also, I mean, another group that I see that I think that we devalue is nonprofits in general, right? We think that it's okay if you work for a nonprofit, money isn't important to you, or maybe not as important, so we don't have to pay you, which is very different. Of course, I come from a place of real privilege here, from the legal profession, where I would say we do value people's time and contribution, at least in the area that I'm in. But that'll be part 2 of this podcast. I also wanted to ask you a little bit. I know that, you've done some thinking or, maybe even writing about the issues concerning AI and social work. And I know that, I read these stories and I hear what's going on, how people are, asking ChatGPT for advice that they should really be asking a licensed professional about. And curious, what your thoughts are on that, and, how it is that the, NASW is looking at these issues, because I think there's a whole host of complications and issues surrounding the use of AI in your profession.
Yeah, AI to me is so fascinating. It's a tool. It's a valuable tool that many folks are utilizing to enhance their work and to push and move them in ways that maybe they hadn't thought of. And then it is a very, I don't want to use hyperbole, but it is a dangerous thing in some of these spaces. And again, the AI as it currently exists is not meant to push you when AI thinks that you're maybe moving into an unhealthy place or an unsafe place. AI is meant to support your movement as you dictate. And that's not what a therapist does. If you sort of start exploring certain areas that need resistance, a therapist will put resistance out there and they'll say, well, have you thought about it this way? Or what about this side? Or let's explore that deeper. They'll really bring you into the space and then allow you to figure out where the boundaries are. And there are no boundaries in AI. They're just not. One of the things we talk about in social work is that dual relationships are very important. And your therapist cannot be your best friend. It just doesn't work like that. They can't I know, go figure, but they can't do both jobs well if there's mixing. Your AI therapist can be your AI life partner if you want. Like there's no sort of delineation in how you utilize that tool. And that really is ultimately what gets to what NASW and what our work is about is how do we keep AI as tools? How do we protect the scope of practice from social workers and say, I'm sorry, you can't have an AI therapy. You can talk to AI all you want, but if you need what we see as therapeutic services, that is going to be done through your connection to a human and another person. Now that human may use AI and you may have AI on the side. Again, my goal is never to shut anyone down from engaging with a program they want to engage with. But when it comes to therapy, when it comes to engaging, when it comes to the work itself, our goal is really to protect that scope of practice. And sometimes we have allies out there who totally get it. And then sometimes we have others who are like, look, we can do this cheaper, faster, and better if you just give us a bunch of algorithms for people to talk to. And so that's where we have to do education and explore and highlight both the harms that can come from it, but also, and this is maybe even more important, the benefits that come from talking to a person.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know that I have seen through my own use of AI or looking at other people's chat histories, it's really an echo chamber, right? Yes. AI will tell you what you want to hear versus maybe what you need to hear. And I think for that reason, just like what you were saying, it's not a replacement. I imagine, though, that there are tools that can be really helpful with AI that, in conjunction with, a licensed social worker and professionals, I think there's probably a lot of benefits. So it's hard to know, what's the right mix.
Yeah. We have a lot of, so before COVID, maybe 95% of the clinical social workers I knew were in person all the time, and 5% did a little bit of telehealth online. Since COVID, it's now 95% of the social workers I know and therapists out there have some form of telehealth. We're talking right now over a platform that we just didn't use before COVID, but now we have screens and Zoom and Teams and Google, all of the things that we have. And there are many therapists who utilize AI in those spaces. It'll take notes for you. It'll give you feedback. It'll give you statistics on how much you talked, how much the client talked, the last time they brought up their mother, on maybe a potential diagnosis based on what they said. Like, you can really turn to them for that. But the more you do that, the less likely you are to write your own notes. The less likely you are to sort of fact check that diagnosis that they've given you and maybe just take, like, again, if you lean on that crutch, then you lose the ability to stand up straight at times. And that's what we want folks to continue to do, is to say, you can monitor these things, you can use them. But if you're not very aware of what your oversight needs to look like, you will lose to them in the long run. So the goal is not just to protect the professionals, it's to protect the work and the integrity of what the professionals are doing. And that's where we then have to sort of sometimes lean into our own members and say, yeah, this will save you half an hour, but what are you trading by doing that?
So speaking of your members, I'm curious, if you had to choose, one or two issues, that the current social workers should be paying attention to right now? Like, what are the big issues? If there's social workers listening, I know we've talked about the reclassification. What else should they be paying attention to?
Well, I'll do some big buckets, and I think human rights right now is at a crossroads in this country. I think we're seeing a Supreme Court that is deciding on whether this is a human right or a documented person's right, which to me is astounding. I think this country was really founded on rights for people, and those rights have been continually expanded as we have grown as a country. And to now see a restriction and to say, well, maybe because you're not documented and you're a child, you can't get an education in this country would be astounding to me. Bodily autonomy. And that relates to everything from reproductive care to sexual orientation and gender identity are also being excluded from certain rights and spaces. So in that large human rights space, we just have to be asking, like, what is this country about? Is it about a fundamental set of principles, or is it about picking and choosing who gets access? And my hope would be that as social workers and others, we come back to the fundamental principles for all. And then beyond that, I think behavioral health is so much more valued today. I mean, you see sports figures and you see those in movies like celebrities. Everybody's talking about mental health, so it's much more out there, which is wonderful. But there's still a major stigma attached to it, and we still see a whole lot of folks maybe concerned or worried about what will happen if they go into a therapeutic space or how it can benefit them or not, and they're still not necessarily out there. So I think we need a whole lot more work on behavioral health, and we need a whole lot more people understanding it's just as important as physical health, that the balance is what we're seeking, that we're not trying to push you into talking about things or getting into spaces that make you uncomfortable. We want you to find comfort inside, and sometimes that work itself will lead to more work, and you'll find more health and more growth and all of that. But, really those two spaces of sort of the social justice and really the personal well-being as it relates to mental health are areas that I hope folks are focused on, looking at, and really advocating for.
Well, sadly, I mean, I think, for the human rights and bodily autonomy, that's multiple podcasts, right? We could talk a long time about that and what's going on. But interesting, I talked to a lot of guests about the impact of stigma and mental health. And I think that other countries, handle this much better than we do in terms of how we treat mental health as health, and how there's just a completely different shift in terms of, helping your brain, and helping your brain if your brain is sick without all of the shame. So I think that that's a continuing challenge that we all face. So curious, if you could give advice to yourself, your younger self, or maybe some advice for early career social workers, what is that piece of advice that you would give?
Yeah, a lot of times what I find is that people come into social work because of a personal history. Maybe they've experienced challenges. Maybe they've been in spaces where they wished support was there, or now they've seen different ways to do things. A lot of people bring that personal identity into social work. And I always want to encourage them to know that that's a very important part of their motivations, but that they need to watch how they put that out there in the work that they do. Something that I tell folks a lot is you have to know where you stand so you can get out of the way, which is really about that identity being your unique set of values and unique set way of doing things that you don't put as a barrier in front of other clients. I see a whole lot of people come into social work wanting to focus on other people's problems so they can ignore their own. And I think that's that parallel process. You have to be doing your own growth. If you're telling other people to go to therapy, think about it for yourself. If you're out there helping people to live their happiest and best lives, make sure that your healthy habits are there in your own life. Like really make sure that the modeling, if not obvious to the clients, is there as a foundation for your work, because that's really going to build a relationship and allow you to go forward. So many people, I know they just got that trauma in there, and it's sometimes locked away a little tighter than they'd like. And I talk about they need to let go of that. They need to release that a little bit so that when they share that type of guidance with their clients, it comes from a real genuine place.
I'm curious. I just sort of assumed that as part of the social work curriculum, there would be some mandatory, I guess this, maybe I'm naive on my part. Like, no. If you want to be a social worker, go get some therapy, as part of your training. I guess that's not part of it, huh?
It is and it isn't. We encourage it, but therapy is a very intimate, private space. So what you do in there, I remember one of the first times I went to therapy when I was back in graduate school, because very much like you said, this was, okay, go live out there the way you're telling your clients to live. And I sat with the woman for 45 minutes, and then afterwards she was like, did you just come here and tell me how great your life was? Because that's not really what people do in therapy. They tend to share their challenges. They tend to share their other things. And I just sort of use this as a way to deflect and avoid from the other things. And that's what I needed to hear, which was, hey, there's other things going on. Your life is wonderful and great in many ways, but there are challenges. You could have the greatest parents in the world. They could have done everything, given you nothing but love. You could still use therapy later because there were challenges and they made mistakes and they were humans and they did the best they could, but that didn't always mean they did that right thing in that moment or it did that thing for you. So honestly, we really should be using these spaces just as honestly for ourselves as we are for our clients.
Well, I really appreciate that. I mean, I think everybody could use therapy, especially with everything going on in the world today. But so we like to ask all of our Think Factory guests, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I wanted to be strengths based and look at the positive, but a lot of what keeps me up at night is really around where we are as a world in relation to our environment. I worry a whole lot about. I have three kids under 13, and I worry a lot about the world they're going to step into, and I worry resources are going to become more scarce for certain folks. We're going to see some major changes to the way that refugees and folks move around because of access to, like, I just really worry about the environment. So it's a space that I try to do a lot of proactive work in. We have a brand new eco-social work committee here. I've been doing a whole lot more advocacy around this space. I think social workers do really good in behavioral health and social justice, but we don't go as good in this. So to try to sleep better, I'm trying to work better on focusing more on the environment.
Well, that's great. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they can reach you?
You can find me if you head over to the website, naswtx.org, which stands for National Association of Social Workers, Texas chapter.org. I'm at all the chapters, but that one's the shortest. And if you just head over to staff, you'll find my email. I am always here for a conversation or support or questions around social work or other things, and would be more than happy to connect with anyone who reaches out.
Oh, thank you so much. So I want to thank you, Will, for being here. And I'm Susan Kleiner, and on behalf of our entire team at OGC Solutions and the Think Factory, we want to thank you for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check out the other Think Factory podcasts where my colleagues talk to business leaders about industry trends and issues. Thanks, Will, for being here with us.